Okay, hi everybody, and thank you so much for attending today. I understand that my audience is going to consist of all sorts of staff across the spectrum within the school district. So I've tried to make this as general as possible to apply to many, many different settings and situations. But of course, if you have any questions, let me know and we'll try to answer those specific to your situation. Can everybody see me, Val?
Yes, I can see
Okay.
you.
Okay. Hi, everybody. All right. So today our objective is going to be to develop an understanding of anxiety in children and adolescents and how to effectively support those children through their anxiety. What I've added to today's presentation is a special piece related directly to the coronavirus and COVID-19. I think we are in a very, very special time, and children are experiencing a lot of anxiety as a result of that. So I wanted to talk specifically how we can address some of that for our kiddos. Next. So I want to talk about how do we define anxiety? So anxiety in general is the mind and body's reaction to stressful and dangerous or unfamiliar situations. It's a sense of uneasiness, distress, or dread felt before a significant event, and it actually is a positive thing. So anxiety can keep us alert and aware and ready to go. We feel a healthy amount of anxiety before we do a presentation on Zoom to a school district. We feel a healthy amount of anxiety at the beginning of a school year when we're going back to our jobs. So this is actually a good thing for us to have this. It keeps us up and running. But it can also get to the point where we experience anxiety that is greater than is needed for the given situation, and that's where it can become debilitating. It becomes this kind of problem when it's chronic, when it's intense, or it interferes with our everyday functioning. And we're going to talk about how that can happen. It's estimated that anywhere from 6 to 20% of children suffer from anxiety that can be debilitating or diagnosable. Next slide. So I want you to look at this. This is a girl from New York. And this girl says in her own words more beautifully than anybody can say it, I hardly slept from the first day of sixth grade to the last day of high school, trying to achieve a 4.0 GPA. The anxiety this caused me was not obvious. It was what I referred to as silent anxiety. So keep in mind that we don't always know who has debilitating anxiety. Some people can function at a very high level with it. Some people, it's obvious and right there in front of you, but it's not the same for every child. So we have to keep that in mind as we move through this. Next slide. So, what do children and adolescents worry about? It's different depending on their age. So age is going to factor into when you're looking at a child or considering a child, do they have anxiety that's debilitating or not? With children, some of the things that they worry about impressing their peers. How are the kids around them going to receive them? They worry about school performance. They worry about making parents happy. They worry about current events. Right now, our main event is COVID-19, and they worry about family issues. In the job that I do, I am impressed with the number of children that know some of the adult workings of their family dynamics. Dad loses a job. It's a big issue. It's very anxiety producing. Mom may have a substance issue, very anxiety producing. There's a divorce, hugely anxiety producing, a move, multiple moves. Those are all family issues, but children very much absorb some of that stuff that should normally be adult issues. And sometimes we don't even know it. With adolescents, impressing peers and fitting in, huge anxiety over that, especially middle school, where they're kind of transitioning from being children into being adolescents. This is a huge issue. How am I perceived when I walk in a room? What clothing am I wearing? Did I say something wrong? Is somebody going to call me out on something? Am I going to get bullied? So those are huge issues in that kind of those tween years. Academics, they worry a lot about academics. Am I going to get into college? Am I going to even get through this class? Athletics, crushes and relationships, huge issue, romantic relationships. Material possessions, we talked about clothing, it extends to cars, it extends to phones, it extends to electronics. Social media is now a huge issue for children. And in the future, college and jobs. What am I going to do when I get out of high school? Next slide. So I put this slide in, not only because I love SpongeBob, but I put this slide in because this is the typical way that we think about anxiety. Someone whose leg is bouncing, or you're biting your nails, or your eyes are just bulging out of your head. It's not always like that for these kids. A lot of anxiety, especially kids that have diagnosable intense anxiety, is very much internalized. Think back to Morgan, the girl who gave us that quote so beautifully. Morgan never showed her anxiety to anyone, and she suffered from huge anxiety. There's a whole story behind her, and no one really knew it. She was a smart student. She was in all kinds of activities. She did great, but she really was falling apart internally, and it was starting to affect her physical health. So we always have to keep in mind, anxiety is, you don't always see what's happening underneath with a child. So what does anxiety look like? If it doesn't always look like SpongeBob biting his nails, what does it look like? It can look like agitation, a kid that gets easily irritable. It can look like restlessness. It can be the kid whose leg is bouncing or gets up and walks around the room. It can also look like inattention or poor focus. There are a lot of somatic symptoms that go along with it. So if you have a child who's chronically got a stomach ache or talks about a headache, that could be anxiety that's manifesting physically. Avoidance behaviors. I had a child who had anxiety and did not want to go in and talk to the teacher in the morning about what was going on. He avoided it like the plague. He did not want to do it. So a lot of avoidance behavior, because what in the short run, that's very effective for them. It keeps them from having to feel that intense anxiety. In the long run, that can create even more problems. So we'll take the math example. Child doesn't want to go in and talk to the math teacher, but is flunking math, has huge anxiety over it, doesn't go in. The grades keep dipping because they can't solve the problem together, and then there's more anxiety. So it's just kind of this downward spiral sometimes with avoidance behaviors. Tantrums, especially in younger children, you'll see tantrums, crying. They may feel depressed. Anxiety and depression go hand in hand. If you're at a heightened level of anxiety all the time, it eventually is going to wear you down, and you're going to start to feel depressed because you just can't maintain that heightened level all the time and function well. Excessive worry, it's a hallmark of anxiety. Refusal to participate in school activities, that goes back to kind of the avoidance behavior. You're so anxious that you don't even want to do anything extra. You just want to get through your day and get home and avoid what's happening in life. Difficulties in transitioning. This is really important, especially when you work in a school. Kids with a lot of anxiety need a lot of time to prepare for the next thing so they can think it through, manage the anxiety. Some kids can just pick it up and move to the next step. Kids with a lot of anxiety, they need that transitional period. So very important in when you're planning things, planning activities. Having high expectations for performance in school. Back to Morgan. She had very, very high expectations for herself, and that results in kids that don't know how to fail and fail without it becoming catastrophic for them. Next slide. Some of the anxiety disorders that you'll be seeing in children, they have social anxiety disorder. This means they really struggle in social situations. They'll be okay if they can isolate and be on their own, but when they get into a social situation, their self-awareness or how they're going to be perceived is so great that they can't really perform well or perform socially. Generalized anxiety disorder, nothing specific. They just generally interfacing with life feel anxious. Specific phobias, they're afraid of something. There's something, I'm afraid of heights. I'm afraid of small spaces. That you'll see that one a lot. I'm afraid of being locked in a classroom because I can't get out. So specific things. Panic disorder. This is a child who actually has a panic attack. It can result in so much anxiety that they literally, their bodies start, their heart starts to race, they start to sweat, they start to think that their life is threatened, and they have a panic attack. Separation anxiety, can't be away from a parent, creates a huge amount of anxiety when they are away from them. Selective mutism, they choose not to talk. Agoraphobia, they can't leave a room, they can't leave their house, that the anxiety is so high just going out of a safe space that they can't leave it. And then medication-induced anxiety if they're taking a medication. So we just have to always remember to ask that question. Some other anxiety disorders are obsessive compulsive disorders. I have to do a certain thing. I have to do it. If I don't do it, I'll feel so anxious that I can't handle it. So I do these routines. Body dysmorphic disorder. They see their bodies in a way that the facts just don't support it. A girl that's very, very thin will look in the mirror and see someone who's overweight. Hoarding disorders. Trichotillomania, pulling out of the hair. It's a symptom of having a lot of anxiety. They pull out their hair. It helps to bring that anxiety down. Discoriation disorder, that's picking. They pick at their skin. It helps. It's a self-harming behavior. It's like cutting. It helps to bring anxiety down. Trauma and stressor disorders, there's reactive attachment disorder, disinhibited social engagement disorder. These are people that have bad boundaries. They just don't see what's wrong with just coming up and grabbing somebody and pulling them up off the ground and hugging them. That wouldn't be an issue for them. PTSD, there are two kinds. There's acute stress disorder, and that's something where there is a very targeted thing that happens in their life, and it creates a stress disorder. There's also chronic. These would be children who are emotionally, physically, sexually abused over long amounts of time. They're now finding that they have chronic stress disorders. Adjustment disorders. They get into a situation that you have trouble adjusting to. An example of this would be I moved from California to Alaska, and I don't have any friends anymore, and I don't understand the culture, I don't understand the cues, and I'm having trouble adjusting to this new life. Next slide. So let's look at some of the things that are causing a risk for children, for risk anxiety for children. We have biological factors. Females are twice as likely to have anxiety. There are genetic markers, meaning if you have a direct parent, biological parent that has anxiety, you are going to be more likely to have anxiety. There's going to be a genetic marker for that now. Temperament. So somebody says, when I've been in sessions, I'll say, they were very anxious as little kids. Small changes in environment would lead to large differences in how they reacted. It's temperament. So, and that goes back to genetics also, that genetically you may just have a temperament for anxiety. Very, very small changes that a lot of people could just roll with. Kids that have that sort of temperament, it can set off a whole panic attack in them. So it's a negative dysregulation and behavioral inhibition are common in children with anxiety. We'll see that as part of their temperament. Environment. So some of the environmental factors that can impact children and cause anxiety: early childhood anxious attachment. So what does that mean? That's a very fancy term for kids that didn't get the attention that they needed when they asked for it when they were babies. We cry as a baby, someone comes and picks us up and comforts us and feeds us and changes us and gives us love. We get put down, we're fine. We cry again, someone comes and picks us up, feeds us, changes us, gives us love, and puts us down. And we come to know and expect as babies that we are going to be comforted. Children that don't get that become very anxious in their attachment. Um, they don't know what's going to happen. If I cry, is anybody going to come and feed me? Will anyone come and comfort me? It's anxious attachment is different than being neglected. So if I cry as a baby and I know no one's going to come and get me, I just shut down. That's called avoidant attachment. But if I'm never sure, sometimes mom comes, sometimes I get a bottle, sometimes dad changes me, but sometimes they don't. That's anxious attachment, and that can be pervasive throughout a childhood. Um, so early attachment issues. Parental anxiety and modeling. If a parent is very anxious, they are going to telegraph that to a child. Parental-child interactions. Again, this goes back to some parental anxiety. If a child's anxious and a parent is not well-versed in how to handle anxiety, you're going to see an interaction that happens there that may actually increase anxiety. If the parent is very anxious themselves and you've got an anxious child, there's going to more than likely be an anxious interaction there. Traumatic life events, parental death, bullying, sexual, emotional, physical abuse, and a lack of access to resources. Lack of access to resource, they're now finding can be very pervasive with anxiety and anxiety producing for kids. Living poor is really tough, is the simple way to put it. Next slide. Okay. So this is a picture of the brain, and I just want to go through quickly, and some of you may already know this, but there is a physiological event that happens in the brain that creates anxiety. Once upon a time when we were cave people, we had to exist in a very dangerous world. So anxiety was a good thing for us. Fight, flight, or freeze. And we had to figure it out in order to stay alive. We no longer have those kind of stressors in our life, but we still have that brain. So our brain still gets activated to be anxious, and we have to decide, are we going to fight? Are we going to flee? Or are we going to freeze? Well, in this world that we're in now, we don't necessarily have to fight for our lives, but our brain still says, in this little part of our brain, um, let's see, the frontal cortex is that part of our brain, the red part, that helps us to think. So there's a little tiny green spot below the frontal cortex, our thinking part of our brain. That little green spot is called the amygdala. And when we have a trigger that creates anxiety, that gets lit up. And in children that are anxious, that is lit up a lot. But they don't have the option of running or fighting. They just feel anxious. So that is always lit up. So the key, and what we're going to talk about in the later part of this presentation, is how do we get that to dim down and help them to light up their frontal cortex, where they can think through a problem and talk through in their head, how do I calm down? Now, the other thing I want to talk about in the childhood brain is our brains develop from the time that we're in utero until about 26 years old. We do not have a fully developed brain until 26, around that age. So if you look at that frontal cortex, it is still growing in a child, and it has a lot of growth well into adulthood. So it is underdeveloped. And when you're working with a child who's very anxious, remember, we are thinking with a fully developed brain, a fully developed frontal cortex. They are not. So what seems obvious to us, like you just need to calm down, you're gonna be okay. They're not able to do that. That amygdala is shining bright and that frontal cortex is underdeveloped, and they're not seeing it the way a rational adult would see things. So remember that when you're dealing with them, you're actually dealing with a brain that it's not that they're not wanting to calm down or they're not wanting to comply. Their brain may not be able to do it in that moment. Next slide. So let's talk a little bit about that. How can we help a child? And I want to start this discussion by talking about what doesn't help. What does not help is to tell them they're going to be all right. They do not think they're going to be all right. This is real for them. This is anxiety itself is self-fulfilling. It creates more anxiety. They don't know what to do about it, and they don't believe they're going to be all right. So it actually creates more anxiety to tell them it's going to be okay, because then they think, well, why am I not okay? Everybody thinks this is okay. I'm not. I don't believe it's going to be okay. And it can actually elevate anxiety. Telling them not to worry. They have to be able to feel the feelings around their anxiety. And a lot of that is worry. So telling them not to worry, and then they can't accomplish that goal either, can increase worry, hence increase anxiety. So what do we want to do with that child? Next slide. So what we want to do, I'm going to go through several different things that we can use. And I want you to always think about how to adapt some of these things that will make it age appropriate. And we'll talk a little bit about that, but some of these will apply across ages. Some of them you'll have to adapt. So this is called the feel method. In the feel method, the F, freeze. Just stop for a minute. Whatever is happening in that moment, stop and take a breath and do it with the child. Model it with them, this behavior. Nothing's going to get accomplished when they're in a very high state of anxiety. So just stop everything. Let's take a breath. Empathize. Tell them that you get it. I get how you're feeling. Validate the feeling. This must be really, really difficult right now. I get that this might make you feel very anxious. I understand where you are right now. Okay, so empathy. Evaluate. Once the child's calm, then you can start to figure out solutions. The reason you can't go directly to the solution is when that amygdala is so activated and we're trying to get them into that frontal cortex piece where they're thinking up through on solutions, it's not going to happen until the chemicals are, and what the amygdala does is it puts cortisol and I'm sorry, it puts cortisol into the system, and and adrenaline, and it starts to get the child physically amped up. So there is no solving anything until you can get that child back down to a level where they can think through in that frontal cortex part of their brain. Then let go. Then you have to let go of it and know that you helped this child and that this child is now on a better track. So tell the child, at this point, we're good. We're going to try to move forward once we're in that solution mode. Next. So specifically for schools, allow a child to take a break from the classroom and reset. At this point, I know there's some children at home doing online. There's some kids in the classroom. There's some combinations of that, is my understanding. So this can also apply to the home setting. When they are so anxious, they are not going to accomplish the task at hand. Let them take a break. Let them reset. In the classroom, you'll have to figure out, or on the bus or whatever setting they're in, how do we do that safely and still have them supervised? And sometimes I understand that can be a challenge, but if you can figure out how they can take a break, even if it means you still have to stay in that seat, you still have to stay in front of me, have them close their eyes, have them breathe, have them have some quiet time. that can help, and still you can watch the child. So a break with a reset. Next slide. So this is one that kind of works across the board. You would have to sort of change it up for an older child, but externalizing the worry. So create a worry character. A worry character for littler kids can be something like a little stuffed animal or just an imaginary character. For older kids, you may not be able to create a worry character, but you can certainly externalize the worry. Ask them to go through the process of step outside yourself and talk about a friend. If you could be your own best friend and step away from yourself, what would you tell yourself? What would you say to yourself? Externalize them from the actual worry. For little ones, it can be a little bear or whatever their little stuffy is, or they can draw one, and that can be their worry character. We can take that worry out of them and talk with the character about it. Discuss how this character can get out of control and what can be done to rein the character in. So we're not talking specifically about them. It depersonalizes that anxiety. Next slide. Okay. Help the child to be a thought detective. So one of the things you can do is you can catch your thoughts. Imagine a bubble of thought above you and catch hold of it. This works for little ones and it works for older ones. So when you catch them in a worry thought, say, let's take that thought. Let's take that moment. Let's talk about what you just said, and let's gather some facts to support that. So a kid with social anxiety, for example, I'll never have any friends. Okay, so let's catch that thought. Let's talk about that. Now, you do stuff with Susie over here, the neighbor. You hang out with her after school. So is it true that you're never going to have any friends? Or is it that there are certain situations that create this social anxiety? I'm never going to get into college. Okay, well, you have a 3.8. Let's get online and let's actually look at the facts. With a 3.8, you're going to get into a college. I have it factually right here. So what can we do to bring that worry down? So you can do this with older children and with younger children. You just have to kind of change the verbiage on it. Challenge your thoughts. Challenge a child when you hear them say something that's full of worry and anxiety. Just say, tell me about that. Tell me the pros of that. Tell me the cons of that, and kind of have them verbalize the anxiety and debate that or challenge that. Next slide. Allow them to worry. So this one, when I first saw this one, I thought this seemed kind of silly. Like, we're going to set aside time to worry. It actually is very effective. I've done it with clients before, where you actually say, you know what? I can see why that's worrisome. Let's get together at 4 o'clock today and let's talk about that worry. So can you just set it aside? Let's try to complete this task. And then let's talk about that after class, why that's worrisome. And actually have a time that's designated to try to process through that worry. It works really well. Another thing that works really well is have them write it down, have them journal it. Some kids can't verbalize it, but they can put it into writing. So that's another good way to do that. The other thing that you can do is combine these two things, is say, I cannot help you with this right now. Why don't you go ahead and write this down, take some time to put it in writing, and then let's get together at 4 o'clock and we'll go through your journal. And that's also very effective. Next. Okay. Help them go from what if to what is. So we've all done it. Well, what if this happens? What if that happens? What if, what if, what if? And it can spiral because there's no end to the what ifs. I mean, it hasn't happened. So the only thing that limits the what ifs is our imagination. And with an anxious person, those what ifs are always going to be very anxiety ridden, right? What if I never get into college? What if my friends don't like me anymore? It can go on and on and on. So what we need to do when you hear what if is pull them back into the present with what is. What is actually happening today, right now? and make them verbalize that. Tell me, what is happening now? This is really just mindfulness, you guys. And for people that don't know what mindfulness is, it's just techniques that we use to pull us back into the present. We can do it through touch, through hearing, through breathing, but it pulls us from all that projection into the future, which just looks catastrophic to an anxious person, back to what is happening right here and now. Are you safe right now? What are the facts? What are you feeling? Let's take a breath. Think about your breathing, and then we're going to reset. So these things all kind of tie in together. Next. Okay, avoiding everything that causes anxiety. We talked about this a little bit earlier. So it is human nature to want to avoid things that create anxiety. However, that is achieving a short-term goal, which is not to feel anxious in the short term, but not resolving the problem. So you may still have to get up and do a presentation in front of a classroom. You may still have to go to school every day and interact socially. You may have to go to work and perform certain tasks. So we can actually habituate, meaning we can expose the child to the stressor by having them face the stressor. And we can certainly help them through that through something called a laddering technique. It's where if it's overwhelming, let's take, I don't know why I keep taking math. I think I must have math anxiety, but let's take math. So they're not doing well in math. It's creating a lot of anxiety. They don't want to go to class. They're skipping class. All this stuff is kind of going downhill. A laddering technique is, let's set up one goal for today. Let's see how you do on that. Then we'll go to the next step. And the next step, we'll go meet the teacher. We'll have a math tutor come in. You can kind of break it down into doable steps for them. Many goals which you know are achievable. And the challenge for us as the people guiding an anxious child is to make sure that we're making them doable goals, that we don't overreach in our attempt to try to resolve these issues, make them very doable. Just go in and say hi to the teacher and say, I'm going to meet with you tomorrow. Doable goals. If they can't do it all, they can't meet the teacher and they say, I just can't talk to this teacher, let's back it down then. Do you need me to walk in with you? Do you need 5 minutes to breathe before you go in? There are different ways that you can do it, and you can set that up with the child. Next slide. Okay. So this is another child's, in their own words. It says, the people around me didn't know that I had an anxiety problem or that my tantrums were panic attacks, but they knew I was delicate. They knew that I liked to keep myself to myself. They helped me to achieve that by not exposing me to anything that might freak me out. So it goes back to understanding what anxiety looks like in this quote. Understanding what anxiety looks like. Is a tantrum really just a kid who's angry, or is it a kid who's so anxious that this is how the kind of maladaptive behavior that we're seeing around that anxiety? Not exposing a kid to anything to keep them calm is not going to help them in the long run. We have not dealt with the anxiety at that point. Okay, next slide. All right. Help them work through a checklist, create a step-by-step method to calm down. So we've identified the stressors. Now, what in just everyday life, what would be a checklist when you have anxiety or you feel it start to come up that you can do to start to bring that down? So number one on the checklist would be identify that I'm feeling a certain way. Know how you're feeling. Number two, I can go sit in a corner I could go talk to the teacher and set up a plan where I can go sit in the corner. I go sit in the corner. I close my eyes. I take a breath. I do my mindfulness techniques. I feel the air. I listen to the sounds. I take 5 minutes in the counselor's office if that doesn't work. Have a checklist. Then I return back to the classroom. I try for 10 more minutes. There are different steps that a child can take until that just becomes habitual for them in order to deal with the anxiety when it starts to come up. So create that checklist. I think that's a really helpful one because it creates good, healthy habits in them. Next slide. Ask open-ended questions when a child is anxious. So what do those look like? How are you feeling about the test tomorrow? Instead of, are you anxious about the test tomorrow? He now has only, in that question, he only has two answers, yes or no. You don't get very rich information from him. But if you ask, how are you feeling about the test? You may not get a very rich answer from them, but it certainly opens it up for them to talk about their feelings. Share a story. Read a book on anxiety. I have a whole list of books from little toddlers up to adolescents. If you guys are interested, and I can get those, Valerie, you can probably list those along with this. But tell a personal story to normalize the child's or the adolescent's experience. I know how this felt. I remember one time when I had to go take a test to get into college. I remember feeling overwhelmed by it. I remember that. What you have to be very careful with in storytelling is that you don't discount their experience. So you get so involved in your own experience and telling your own that it becomes about you. So it has to be a story that you tell in support of them. So you just have to watch that line. Next, try walking and talking. I think the best thing you can do with a child sometimes is not to address it in the moment, in the situation, is just to say, hey, let's go take a walk. It's been, as a therapist, it's been one of the most effective things that I've ever done, is just to say, hey, you want to go take a walk? Let's go up and get a soda in the cafeteria. Let's go sit down in this hallway. You want to come into my office? I have some kinetic sand. Just take them out of the situation. Doesn't have to even be talking about what happened. Just let that amygdala calm down. Let them calm down. Let them breathe. And then you can go and talk about the actual trigger to the anxiety. Gives them a chance to talk. It gives them a chance to breathe again, exercise. It all just kind of brings it back down. Then you can go into solution mode with them. Next slide. Okay. It was only when I voiced my emotions to my advisor that I began to feel less alone. I still feel the anxiety creeping in before exams when the familiar suffocating feeling returns, and I have to remind myself that my entire future is not dependent on one exam. Encourage children to talk to you. Just tell me. We have all these solutions we just talked about, but sometimes in all of those solutions, it is the ability to listen and hear them that comes first. Then we can go into solution mode. If they don't tell you, it can be extremely isolating. Kids think they're the only one that feels the way they feel. Everybody else out there, every other kid that they look at, seems happy and interactive and it's got life by the tail. They don't realize a lot of kids suffer from this. A lot of adults suffer from it. So if you can just hear them, that's the beginning of trying to find those solutions. Okay, next slide. All right. Managing anxiety in children during a pandemic. We have a lot of kids in care right now that are very, very anxious. I know you guys are on the front line of this with school. It just, my heart goes out to you as educators and working in the educational system. So I wanted to put this in here to kind of give you some techniques and tips of what you can do as educators and working in the educational system to help with COVID-19. So the first thing is managing your own anxiety. I think if we can bring it down, and I work in a mental health hospital, so every day I have to readjust before I walk on the unit. I have to get in the mindset of being positive, not feeling fearful, kind of my worries that can spring up around COVID-19. So just some of the things that I have found helpful is I have limited how much I read or see or look at on social media. I have some few very trusted sources. One of those is the CDC guidelines, and just very factual stuff. I try to stay away from the emotional stuff, the political stuff, all that stuff, because it can really start to impact you and your feelings around it, your anxiety around COVID-19. Be mindful of routines and create new routines when necessary. So obviously, all our routines have changed with social distancing, with masking, with how we have to handle certain hygiene issues at school. Every routine you probably knew has changed now, regardless of what you do within the school district. So if you have any of those older routines that you can bring into your new routines, I think that's always good. And create new routines that are workable and will become habit for you. I think it's really, really important to have a new normal. And I know when we worked in the hospital, we had, and Valerie can attest to this, all of a sudden we had to go through one gate. And it was a very stressful thing for me because I had gone through a gate down by my units and just walked in and walked out of my units. And I had to go through this long line, this checkpoint, have my temperature taken, answer questions, fill out forms. It took me 25 minutes longer to get to my units. And I thought, I just can't do this. It's now so routine, I don't even give it a second thought. It's what I do. I have a new routine. I actually kind of like it now because what it incorporated was my morning greeting has become with the people at the check-in gate. It's not on the units, it's a check-in gate. And I've met a whole new group of people that I probably wouldn't have talked to much in the hospital prior to that. And they're lovely and they're upbeat, and that's my new routine. So it becomes habit when you can make those routines. Be concrete and be hopeful. I think it's important that we know this is not going to last forever. We are going to get through this. We've got this. We are stronger than we think, and we are going to come out of this on the other end. We are maybe different, but there's always hope. We can't get too deep into the darkness. Next slide. Okay. Here are some ideas just for kids, working with kids during the pandemic that I really like, and we do some of these on the units. So try keeping up with or try new hobbies. If you can't do the things you used to do, try some new stuff. So I took up the weirdest hobby at the beginning of this pandemic because I couldn't go out, and I ordered a paint by number set, which I did as a little kid. And don't judge, I just loved doing it. It was mindful. It kept me in the moment. It kept me off of any kind of information about COVID, and it kept me focused, and it was very, very detailed. And I really love doing it. I don't do it now, but I did it during the very beginning, and it really was a weird kind of lifesaver. So new hobbies. Participate in virtual cultural activities. There's lots of stuff online, you guys, that you can do that we used to be able to go to and we can't go to anymore, but we can still see things online. Music, dance. Okay, TikTok is not cultural at all, but it's one of those things that it's fun to watch. I like watching the kids do their dances and stuff. So there's lots and lots of stuff that we can do virtually that replaces the old habit. Spend time in nature. One of the lucky things is we can still go outside and be safe and socially distance and mask up and go for a hike. So make sure you spend some time outside, that you're not always in the house. And kids can do that from the littlest to the biggest, to the oldest. Limiting screen time, especially just before bed. So I'm sure you guys have heard there's lots of research about being on your phone, being on a screen, and that it can actually make it difficult for your brain to go to sleep and difficult for it to produce the right amounts of melatonin. So just limit it. Do something different, read a book, but try to limit that right before bed. building in time to connect with classmates, friends, teammates, partners, etc. One of the coolest things that I think has come out of this is we can't do birthday parties and things like that, that now they do drive-bys. So there are ways to keep kids connected, keep friends connected. We have all kinds of technology to do that. Just make sure that you kind of build that into their day in a positive way, in a real structured way. Practicing self-care often and being kind to themselves. So self-care can take on all kinds of different ways. I mean, it can be listening to music, taking a bath, getting some nice products that for a child that smell good, the things that they like to do, sitting down and reading together. I don't, there are just, it's just unlimited. I mean, your imagination is going to take you to a lot of different places, but also to be kind. Just remind people, remind kids, let's go easy on ourselves today. Let's have a snack day where we eat all kinds of bad food and we're not going to feel guilty about it. Be good to yourselves. When you see them doing something that really makes your heart full at school or at home or anywhere, tell them, wow, I loved that. That was really cool what you just did. Really build them up during a time when they may be feeling kind of isolated and anxious. Taking things one day at a time. That goes back to the what if. Well, what if this never goes away? Well, today we're safe. We're doing all the right things to stay safe. And today is today. And we're going to get through today and we're going to rock today. And then tomorrow we'll worry about the what ifs tomorrow. But factually speaking, we're good today. Talking to a safe adult if they need support. So encourage kids. Do you have anybody you can talk to? I can always be that person for you. If you need to talk, come on in. I have my break at 1:00. So make sure that they have somebody to talk to and that's an adult, not just their friends. So the mask. So are you guys having a mask up at school? Is that how is it working at school? Val, can are you getting any of the comments? Here we go. All day, every day. Okay, thanks. Okay. All right. So some of the ways, and we had to go through this in March in the hospital. It became mandatory that all the kids, yeah, looks like you guys are masking. Okay. All the kids at the hospital had to wear masks. And let me tell you, getting adolescents to wear a mask it became my everyday nightmare. They would wear it under their chin. They would wear it under their nose. They would wear it off to the side, dangling from their ear. They would lose them and they would sit right next to each other. And it wasn't because they were being oppositional. It just wasn't in their brain to worry about it or think about it or understand it really. It was all very new to them. So we had to do some things. We had some competitions. We got pizza when I would walk on a unit. If everybody had their mask on, it was pizza day. So we had to do some incentives because just constantly battering them with hey, your mask is under your nose, and we had to do some different things until it became a habit. So here are some of the things on masking. For masking for toddlers, you have to model masking. They'll do what they see an adult that they like do. So if you have your mask on, they'll have their mask on. Make it a game. All right, it's time to put our mask up. I had to make it a game with the adolescents too because they were just over me every time I'd walk on the unit. So I'd say 1, 2, 3, everybody up. So we played games with it, but with little ones especially, make it a game. Make the mask colorful and related to things that they recognize. If there's some TV show that they love and you can get that character, do that. Make them bright. As they get a little older, you can actually have them relate to emotions, smiley faces or funny faces. So as a toddler grows into early childhood, then you can start to do different masks. Let them pick the mask, find out their favorite colors, make it something they like an accessory. As they get older into elementary school, you can start to talk about the why of it. Why are we trying to make sure that no one else gets germs. Use the word germs, not virus. They understand germs. Germs are something we talk about on their hands. We want to make sure that everybody's safe. We want to make sure grandma's safe. We want to make sure your teacher is safe and all your friends around you. And your mask helps to hold your germs in. And so it works really well. That's why we do it. Keep it simple, keep it concrete, and they'll get the why of it. It helps with compliance. Stay away from myths and misinformation. CDC is always a good guideline. If you hear a kid talk about something that's not real, gently just redirect them. If they're not tolerating a mask well, especially little ones, don't make it a power struggle. Just socially distance them. Let them have some time off from the mask and then try again. Because if it becomes a power struggle, especially with littles, it's not one you're going to more than likely win. So just let them reboot on that and keep them safe and keep them away from people. Okay, how do we talk to children during the pandemic? Make it the information age appropriate. Again, modeling behavior for very young children, important. Using words like germs with preschool and elementary. Stay away from all the verbiage and all the details of COVID and how people get infected. Keep it simple, keep it concrete. Germs come out of our mouth. We put a mask on, it stops the germ from coming out of our mouth. Limit media exposure with children that are preteen and younger. Preteens especially, they are on a lot of media. They get a lot of misinformation. I know that from being in the hospital. They say things that you ask, well, where did you get that? Well, I saw it when I was at home, or somebody was talking about it on Instagram or something. So they get a lot of misinformation. As they grow older, teens can be given the CDC guidelines. They're certainly capable of understanding what the guidelines are and that there's structure around what we're doing to stay safe. They can handle that kind of information. And of course, talk to them about why it's important to keep other people safe, that you masking up keeps me from being sick. And they can go into that level of detail. Okay, so just final thoughts for you guys. When you're dealing with anxiety, be open about feelings. Let a kid talk about their feelings. And what I didn't put in here, but I just think is key, is be able to hear it and listen to it before you try to go into problem-solving mode. Be informative about anxiety. It does not create more anxiety for a child to know what happens with anxiety. Let them know this is your body reacting. This is your mind telling your body certain things and your body's reacting, and that we can help this. We can do some things about this, and help your child recognize anxiety when it's happening. When they start to have trouble breathing, or they start to have that heavy feeling in their bodies that they can't function, let them recognize it. It goes back to being informative. Let's talk about what happens to you when you are anxious, and then we can go into that solution mode. So I think those are the most important things that you can do for a child. And once they can talk, once they can understand, and once they can start to act, I think you can see that anxiety come down. It is totally doable. Being anxious, even with an anxious brain that's habitually anxious, does not mean that you're doomed to a lifetime of anxiety. We actually can control it. And we've got some pretty good things to do.
I just want to say, Ellen, thank you so much for sharing your knowledge and experience and insight. I think it's just phenomenal. We do appreciate your time.
Thanks, everybody.